here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk amongst ourselves for a little bit, and then I'm going to open up the floor to questions. I want this to be as much of a conversation and a dialogue as possible. If somebody says something that you either vehemently agree with or even better, vehemently disagree with, jump in on each other, and we'll make this as lively as we can. And again, keep your questions coming. The premise of this panel is going to be looking at, since we've had a day which has been brimming with creativity, whether interconnectivity stimulates and enhances, or in some cases suppresses and limits creativity. That's the premise of this panel. And if you have questions in that vein, or examples in that vein, particularly of areas where you think it might have stifled it, because I'm sure we can think of lots of areas where it stimulated and enhanced it, but I think there might also be some interesting examples, or areas where we perhaps need to look at the interconnectivity to make sure that it doesn't stifle creativity. This is all going to be streamed, by the way, on bbc.com starting tomorrow. The whole conference will be up there. So if there was anything you missed, anything you'd like to look at again, check it out. And then we'll be taking questions and answers, as I said. One thing I should say is that when I said to my son that I was coming up to TED, my 16-year-old son, who does everything online, including dating his girlfriend, I hope online, he was really excited about this. When I said I was coming up to my husband that I was coming up to TED, he thought it was to some Scottish lover. So that's how much he knows about this world. Let's start. Sunny, let me start with you, since you've just spoken at the end of this, on this idea of whether sometimes creativity can be stifled by interconnectivity. Do you see any areas where you think that the way in which we are so connected with each other can limit creativity?
Well, I think that there's different kinds of creativity, but I think certainly from just the overload, I think it's very hard. I know for me it's very hard to have sometimes any kind of a thought, much less a creative thought. And then I have so much, I don't use the tools quite as well as I would like to be able to use them. I'm kind of I have a knee-jerk reaction when an email comes in. I feel like I have to respond to it. So that whole sense about everything becoming urgent and not being in a place where I can close things off. I mean, I can completely close them off when I'm away from home or when I travel. I've seen people. It's not that it makes us dumber, because I think it makes us smarter in many ways. But I think that it's very tricky to go really deep when you're distracted. And there's so many ways this interconnectivity and these constant on and mobile devices, if you've got distractible tendencies, they can really magnify those.
Dennis, I was listening to what you were saying about Foursquare, and I have to say, I'm a complete, techno-Neanderthal, but it was incredibly cool, and I am actually going to sign up so that I know, what's going on in my name. I thought it was incredibly cool, and I love the idea of using it to get people to do things that they might not otherwise do. But when we were listening to Kurt and his extraordinarily moving talk about forgiveness and victimization, and particularly when he was reading from Shakespeare or acting from Shakespeare, I sat there wondering, would this be possible? Would I be able to concentrate on this in the way that I am doing right now if I was in my normal life, which is with my cell phone and my BlackBerry and all the bombardments that I get from this interconnected world? And is there a risk that we do get, as Sunny was saying, overly stimulated and overly distracted to the point that we can't concentrate when we need to on something like Kurt's performance?
Yeah, because everything that takes our attentions right now, specifically if we're talking about mobile stuff, it's just unfiltered. There's been there's been years at which we've been building filters for the web. We build spam filters, and Gmail has all these rules, and we build RSS readers, and we do all this stuff online that helps you find the stuff that you need at a certain time, like when the screen is in front of you. Well, if that stuff doesn't exist on the phone, it just buzzes all the time. It's like, it could be my mom, it could be my girlfriend, it could be a text message, all these things. Like, it's just not smart enough. And it just, the information overload, there's a great quote, I think it's by Clay Shirky, but there's no such thing as information overload. It's like filter failure. We should be able to take all that information and just filter it properly. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're just not using the right filters. So I think we're in this generation of all these interesting things being built for mobile, and one of those things is going to be those filters that enable you to do all these interesting things, but targeted so you're not distracted, or it's not pulling you away from the things that you care about most.
But do the filters come from ourselves, or can they come from the servers?
Well, I think it's a mix of both. Like, I think here...
Some personal discipline.
Yeah, it's like, well, why weren't you checking your phone here? Because of your own personal filter?
I wasn't. I was
or
listening.
because,
I was
they
listening.
blocked us. Like, I couldn't get service here, and
Really
that was the
listening.
filter. It was, like, imposed on me. I
Right.
wish I had, like, that cone of attention filter, but, like, I'm not developed enough to have it.
Raghava, I was talking to you last night, and I was asking you about, the Indian influence in your art, and you kept saying to me, no, there's no Indian influence in my art. My art is global art. I was wondering whether the kind of globalized nature of this interconnectivity means that we risk making homogenization the norm. I mean, if everybody is getting access in every part of the world, eventually, this is extrapolating, to the same information, does art and creativity become standardized?
It's a very interesting question. I always grapple with this because initially I left home and then I discovered India because India is different from home. And although I was brought up in India, and then I started traveling extensively and I started seeing all these cool places. But the truth is I really learned more about myself. I learned about what I like and what I dislike. So the more global I get, the more individualized I become. So the less I am Indian or global, I become a better Raghava, if that makes any sense. So in that sense, I think it does stifle because I don't want information overload. I just want to react as me. So I go a full circle in a sense.
But in specific, I mean, does that mean that somebody who is creating an artist in India has the same access to an artist, to information and input as an artist in Brazil or in Australia or in Switzerland, that you lose cultural identities?
I think cultural identity itself is extremely, it's not specific and not an absolute. I think I can shift from being Indian to anything Moroccan, for all I care. And I believe that what is really absolute is the individual. And I think every human being is different. And it's really difficult for me to perform just one particular sort of nationality.
Sure. Japan, of course, famously cut itself off from the rest of the world for a long period. It had absolutely no interconnectivity. It closed its borders and then opened them up to traders when traders came along in ships, and it had very little choice. So that's a country that's been through a period of no connectivity and now has massive connectivity. Are there ways in which you worry that perhaps... I lived there for a long time, and it seems to me that the Japanese identity and culture is incredibly strong and alive and thriving. But I wonder whether you think that there are instances in which we are seeing the homogenization of produced by interconnectivity.
Yeah, I think I'm the only one who has a different take about interconnectivity, just because, first of all, English is not my first language. And of course, the connectivity that I heard today, I mean, the Shakespeare, it's great, but half of it I couldn't understand.
Nor could I, so that's...
And as you say, you preempted what I was going to say. Japan became a Galapagos in 17th century to 19th. And I think it's becoming again. And it's kind of interesting that BBC, Britain, UK and Japan, it's always talked about as an island. And I think there's a certain productivity that comes out of being very remote and isolated. And for example, Japan right now, there are no sense of inviting foreigners in the architectural field, especially. And also, there are no students who wants to go out and study like there used to be before. But in a way, the white architecture that I showed today is attracting a lot of attention from outside world because it looks so different. And I think there is, whenever I go to Japan, I go often, but I feel really strange to be in the mono race. But still there's an amazing productivity there where there's no guessing, second guessing, there's no language barrier, etc. So, I mean, of course, your question is brilliant because one can be, yes or no. But I'm being the kind of devil's advocate here to say that being cut off could be very productive at this moment.
Gavin?
Maybe
Cut off can be productive.
Well, I think maybe the astronomer in me kind of looks at this slightly differently. I kind of look at this as kind of orbits of interaction. And there's this kind of self-defined close network, which is around me. And then there are many different sort of vectors around an orbit, which includes my peers, or it includes my local social group. And that could be geographically bounded. And I think the thing that we've really dramatically shifted is it doesn't have to be geographically bounded anymore. And so there are different ways of mapping that, and the kind of thing that Foursquare are doing are really important to that. And how we start blending together our online worlds and our offline worlds. And maybe we're still in a phase where the world's still relatively flat and the Earth is still at the center of the universe. And we're waiting for our Kepler to come along and actually map out how we're meant to be interacting in this broader social sphere.
But
Sure.
I have a question, like if you actually think of your manipulation and invention as a means to create something, is it really like to create? It's not, there is no purpose, right, to create something. It's amazing creation, but I don't think there's a goal to create. I mean, architecture there definitely is, but
Well, you create.
it looks so spontaneous as a kind of extension of your lifestyle, what you want, what you experienced. It's not to create. It was just created.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that's happening online now, it's not, like you're saying, it's not to create. The point is to create and then share. And then not just share, but it's like to get feedback on the things that you're sharing with people. And so, when people type 140 characters into that box on Twitter, like they're not there to create that. They're there to share that with people and then get the reactions to the thing that they shared.
But is it total heresy to suggest? I was at an event in Washington, an event for sort of honouring journalists from other countries, on Tuesday night, and Biz Stone was there, one of the founders of Twitter. And as he was speaking, they decided it would be kind of cool to put up all the tweets that came out from this event while he was speaking. And actually, frankly, 90% of them I could have done without. It seemed to me that there was a risk that we are creating a space which then needs to be filled, as opposed to what Show, I think, that's the filter problem, as opposed to what Show is perhaps suggesting, creating something that needs to be created. We are creating a space in which...
So what did you get from the 10%?
One of them was quite funny.
Right.
I think you're looking at creativity is pretty limited in the sense that you have to create an object. And I think what Foursquare does is creates an experience.
Yeah.
And it creates a community around that experience. So thinking about creativity, you're an architect, you create buildings, you create objects, and you create art, but you also create experiences, which is why your art is so interesting. But I think that in that sense, that these tools do help us to think about creating experiences that can be about the community, and that's a key part of the experience.
But do you think that when I actually interviewed Biz and Evan this summer, and I said to them, are we making a false distinction between the idea that Twitter is just there for fun, or that it has to be useful, i.e. that it has to create something? And Biz's response is, well, ice cream is fun, but nobody bans it. It's not. Is this a sort of a bit of a? Are we putting too much weight onto the idea that everything has to be creative that comes out of this interconnectedness?
Yeah, I don't think I had the wrong interpretation of creativity. I'm just saying that being interconnected doesn't necessarily create something. That's as simple as that. And being interconnected in such a kind of spontaneous and almost aggressive form, for me, is like a new way of, as you say, creating an environment and not really creating for the sake of creation.
Yeah. Well, again, it's not creating objects, but like,
sorry, maybe
it's like the Foursquare stuff. Like, you would create check-ins or create these things that you leave behind to share them with people, so that they can then discover them and experience them on their own, which is then like creating those experiences for those people. Like, you're not creating physical objects, but you're, I guess you're creating memories in a sense, and creating experience, and creating these things that kind of live on, and then people then share out. It's just, I think it's a different type of creativity with like a different intent to it.